When I was presented the opportunity to introduce our speaker, without hesitation, I accepted and almost immediately began thinking, what am I going to say about him? I thought I should start with his extensive body of work. That includes presidents, U.S. senators, Fortune 500 companies. I decided against that. I then considered telling you all about his community work with schools, homeless, youth, churches. I decided against that too. I knew I had to share with you the inspiring story of how, as a teenager, he started a business that has thrived for over 4 decades. But I decided against that too. I knew he wouldn't want me to talk about any of his recognitions and awards, like the special resolutions by the Georgia General Assembly or the recognition by the Secretary of State as a recipient of the Outstanding Georgian Citizen Award, or his congressional recognition of Outstanding Achievement of Public Distinction. Not even his Special Service Award presented to him by the Mothers for America's Mental Illness. Nope, I thought I could do better than that. I decided that I would introduce our Father's Day speaker from a personal perspective, as his daughter. My father is the prototype, if you ask me. He's kind. He's kind of like an elephant. He's strong, and he has a presence that commands all and intimidates most. But he's also very gentle and very kind. My dad's a listener. I know most girls talk to their mothers about relationships and hair and personal things, but I talk to my dad. He's a teacher. He somehow, as a man, taught me how to be a woman, how to be graceful, to be assertive, bold, and courageous. He taught me about God and how God is inside of each and every one of us. Most of all, though, he's my best friend, and he's your messenger today. So without further ado, I present to you my friend, my confidant, my teacher, and my father, Vincent Watkins.
Thank you, Tony, for that awesome introduction. I want to thank Pastor Lillian for the invitation to come to Cathedral of Amazing Grace International Ministries and talk today, this Father's Day, on an occasion that I think all of us are very sensitive to, the plight of African American men. When I was invited, I started thinking about what should I speak about? What topics should I discuss and deliver? First, it came to mind was the number of African American men in prison. I thought, the disparity is getting worse, and given the challenges we're experiencing today, this is an area that I think would be very interesting. But then I began to think about the fact that if I talk about this, I'm going to have to talk about the historical aspects of it. I'm going to have to talk about the fact that Georgia, the very Georgia, the state that we sit in, was in fact the penal colony where prisons were celebrated. I have to think about and talk about the disproportionate number of African Americans who are serving time for crimes they did not commit. Here in Columbus, Georgia, we just witnessed recently the release of an African American male who had served almost 40 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. I knew that I would have to go into some of the historical challenges that made up this, and I would have to discuss to some degree the fact that after slavery ended, in order to perpetuate the free labor opportunity that existed for many Southerners, they would begin arresting African Americans, or at that point I should say they were freed Africans. They would begin arresting them so they would have free labor. And I began to think that that would probably be a little too much to discuss on this Father's Day, so I decided not to talk about that. I then thought about the poverty rate of young African American children and how 1 in 3 are living in poverty. And I considered that this might be a very befitting topic, an area to explore. But then I began to, again, think about that perhaps this is not going to be such a good area either, because then I'm going to have to talk about the fact that African Americans are living in impoverished conditions, again, not by chance, but by design. I would have to talk about the challenges that African American fathers have putting food on the table. I would have to talk about the inequities that exist in pay. I would have to mention and share that for every dollar white men earn, African American men who do the same exact job only earn 85 cents. And while some people are probably thinking, well, that's not so bad, 85 cents, I don't think you understand that it's the exact same job and they're getting 15 cents less. And if I was to explain that and explore that, then I would have to explain also that African American men in getting 15 cents less off of every dollar have to work about an hour and a few minutes later every day. So when the white man goes home, the black man who's doing the exact same job has to stay at work for another hour. Again, I knew that there would be some people who would probably say, well, that's not so bad. Still, it's just an hour. I don't think you're understanding that it's the same job that the white man is doing. But then I say, well, all right, if we look at this, if we extrapolate that and we look at this from a different perspective, then we have to understand and appreciate that at the end of the year, calendar year of January, when white men say we're done, we've had a great year, we've earned our money, in order to be equal, if you will, the black men have to work an additional 2 months into the next year in order to have the same money that their white counterparts made. And again, this is for doing the exact same job. So I decided I wouldn't want to talk about the 33% of the African American children who are living in poverty, because I understand how the inequities that exist within the workplace is the cause of that. So I decided against that. And then I went on and I thought about, well, what about the 75% figure that is associated with the households and the homes that are headed by women? Another way of stating this would be saying that 75% of the homes that African Americans in the African American community are headed by women, where there should be a father because there are children in these homes. But I decided against that. Although it's a very hot topic, it's very emotional. For me, I began to think that if I talk about that, then I would have to go all the way back to Africa and have to explain that the separation of man and family began over 400 years ago, when the Europeans went to the continent of Africa, stole us and our ancestors from our families, from our homes, and everything we knew, put us in the belly of a ship, and those who survived and were lucky enough, if you will, to make it to America had to start anew. I can't imagine what that must have felt like, but that was the first separation, a major separation. And then I have to consider that, well, on the plantation, then we also had to deal with the fact that as I've created a new family as a slave, I had to deal with the possibility and the reality that on some day at any given time, I would be sold to another plantation. Not sold as a family. I was going to be stripped and ripped apart. Now, these were acts of separations that were involuntary. And by no means do I make any excuses for those brothers who may have lost their way and are separated from their families. But I do suggest that there is something that we should explore. Then I also have to go into the 1971 or the 70s war on drugs by Richard Nixon, another way to separate man from his family, splitting up the homes even more. No, I decided against those topics. This is Father's Day. This is a time for celebration. So what I decided to do was share a couple of thoughts with you on what Father's Day means and should mean. The first thing I want to say is that I respect the job that my father did. No question about it. My father was the greatest of all time. He was kind, he was caring, he was considerate. He was a man of action. He was a man of demonstration. I appreciate. And aside from being the father of Tony, I would say that the next most exciting thing that has happened to me was being the son of my father, Tony J. Watkins, and my mother, Jacqueline Watkins. Great example for me, and it's very important that we have those examples in our lives. And I must say that even being here in church, it's a little uncomfortable to say it, but the fact of the matter is that before I knew Jesus Christ and God, my father was God. He brought the lights, he brought the food. Everything in my world evolved and emitted from my father. There was no question about it. For me, if there was a God for me to understand, it was Tony J. Watkins. Now, the beautiful thing about this is my father was a man of God. He loved the Lord. He served the Lord. And it was important to him that he led me, or that he lead me as I was growing to worship and to understand the relevance of God. He was a servant. So when I began looking at how I could talk about this today, I went a little deeper and I said, well, let me look at this. The first thing for fathers I need to say is that you have to be a man. I'm not just talking about being a male. I'm talking about being a man. And I know there's a lot of sisters out there who have, and I've heard them talk about the relationship they have with their sons and their daughters and their children and how they have had to be the father and the mother. And I respect all the sacrifice, sons, sisters. I think you've done a wonderful job. And I am so sorry that you had to step over and cross the line and do more. But at most, all a mother can do is just be an extremely good mother. Because a father requires a male. It requires a man. I mean, a man in the sense that he's not just a sperm donor. He's not just there to father the children. He's there to lead. So when we look at what a man is, I think that it's appropriate that we look to the Bible. One of the first things that stood out for me was Genesis 2:15, because God put Adam and Eve in the garden, but he put Adam in a position to work the garden. Because the first quality of a man is that he works. It starts out very early in the Bible as God explains in the 2nd chapter of Genesis that a man is a worker. He's a provider. When African American men have been crippled and choked and chained and restricted from being able to provide in a way that they know they should. But if you're a man, and if you're a good father, you will not be afraid of work. We also know that in Joshua, 1st chapter, 9th verse, talks about strength and courage. Fathers have to be strong. They have to be courageous. Now, I'm not talking about the physical strength. I'm talking about the inner strength. I'm talking about the strength to say what's right and stand up for what's right in those moments and times that it's required that your voice be heard. When I look at our legislators at the federal, the state, and local levels, many times I look at the men and I wish that they had the courage to do what was right. I wish they had the strength to do what was right. You've got to be brave if you want to be free. If you truly want to be free of those things that shackle you to oppression, to debt, to incarceration, to addictions, you've got to be strong and courageous. Men are leaders. Matthew 22nd chapter, 37 through 39th verse. Love, the first and the greatest of all commandments. We must understand that as men, we have to love. We have to create the environment for people around us to feel and to be comfortable sharing not just their love for God, not just their love for our Lord and Savior, but their love for each other. I truly believe that love can conquer all things. When you love someone, you're able to demonstrate to them the value that they have to you, to your environment, to your family, and to the world. That's what this is about. Men, we cannot afford to play this hard, rough role as if we don't have any concerns and we're okay, whatever. That's not what we do. We have to love each other. That's how we save ourselves. That's how we save our future. As we move from love, then I have to look at what being a father really is. In 3 different areas, the Bible talks about fathering. Fathers are joyful, excited about being fathers. You have an offspring, someone to carry on a legacy. If you have a legacy worth carrying on, you should be excited. And your children should see the excitement. The other thing that the Bible teaches us is that you should not provoke your children to anger. You know, this whole idea that we can challenge our kids and we can put our children in their places, that's not what we are here to do. Our children we have been blessed with, but our children are also children of God. We have been trusted or entrusted with a responsibility that we cannot forsake. Don't fight with your children. Don't provoke them. One of the things I live by is I don't fight or argue with my family and friends. We have to understand the responsibilities that we have. Discipline is another area of concern. That as fathers, we should demonstrate and require discipline from our offspring. That's what fathers do. Too much of this, too little of this. We're not here to be best friends. If that is the case, then that's great. But we have work to do. We must prepare our children. So fathers, you should be joyful. You should not provoke your children to anger. And you should practice and demonstrate discipline. Also, as a father, you need to be compassionate. Just showing and being able to demonstrate that you have some empathy or sympathy for someone in your life, in your world, for your children and the situations, the challenges that they're going through. Not having this hard demeanor that, I don't care, I'm going to get mine, you get yours. Men don't cry, men don't show emotions. That's not true. So fathers, be compassionate, accountable. Fathers, men, understand the importance of being accountable. Stand up, take responsibility for the things you've done, things you've said, the things you haven't done. This is not about good. It's not about bad. Right now, it's just about ownership. So if you're a man and you want to be an awesome father, then you must stand accountable for the things that happen in your life and in your community and in your family. Honorable. When we're working with people and talking to people about our lives and what we do, we must be honorable in the way we do it. When we talk about honor, we're talking about integrity, being true to yourself, to the mission. I listened to some brothers in the city of Columbus, Georgia, as they organized a movement, or what they called a movement within the movement. This unique group of brothers and sisters happened to have been Greek. Organized this march that they wanted to demonstrate their support of the injustices, the inequalities, the separation of our system. So they organized a march in the city of Columbus, Georgia, to take place at 7:30 in the morning. They chose 7:30 because they did it at a time they thought very few people would be available. They were right. On top of that, they had a caveat. You can participate in this march if you are Greek, if you're a member of a fraternity or sorority. If you are not Greek, you cannot march. If you're a child, you cannot march. The spouses of the people who were Greek, unless they were Greek, they could not march. First, this was a march that was supposed to be working against segregation, inequalities, separation. And here we have a group of individuals who decided that they thought it was the honorable thing to do to exclude those people who were not in their group. They did invite the mayor of Columbus, who happens to be a white male, not Greek. And although he did not graduate from a college, he did attend, but he did not pledge, as best I understand. And I know he's not a member of the Divine Nine. This is the same mayor that 2 weeks ago ordered the arrest of 40 African Americans for marching because they crossed the line, literally crossed the line. In that group of 40 that Skip Henderson ordered to be arrested was a 14-year-old. So during this event, these brothers and sisters of honor betrayed the principles, all the sacrifices that had been made, all the principles that their organization stood for, because they reduced the movement to a memory, to a moment. It was just a Kodak moment for them. It was no longer the movement of change. It was a moment and a memory of opportunity. That's not honorable. That's not what we mean. When you are a leader, when you are a father, you must rise above those temptations, selfish temptations. When you're a father, you must rise above those things that would not benefit the whole, the family. The Bible says that when someone says you are a man of integrity, trustworthy, dependable, these are among the greatest things that can be said for you. And as fathers, these are some of the greatest things that can be said for you when your children know that you are an honorable man. Happy Father's Day. God bless you.